Do you guys have a what if I win the lottery plan? You know, just somewhere back in your mind, somewhere you're thinking, if I ever win the lottery, I'm going to do A, B, C. I'm going to pay off our house, or we're building a new house, or I'm going to retire tomorrow, or I'm going to donate it all to my church, or whatever it is, right? You have some kind of plan. If I ever win the lottery, I'm going to do these things. I would not necessarily suggest you follow me for financial advice, but one financial decision I've made in my life, I stand by. I have never purchased a lottery ticket. Now, sometimes I'll hear on the news, you know, the lottery, this Mega Millions. Recently, there was a Mega Millions, I think it's called, that was worth $1.3 billion or somewhere around there. And I think, maybe I ought to buy a lottery ticket. And then I kind of consider, what are the chances that you would actually win the lottery? I looked it up this week. You have a 1 in 302,575,350 chance to win the lottery. Now that's a huge number to me. 1 in 300 million. What does that really mean? Well, you are 70 times more likely to be killed by a shark than you are to win the lottery. And you live in Kansas. You are 216 times more likely to be struck by lightning than you are to win the lottery. Now, you have better odds to win that Mega Millions lottery than you do than to be hit by falling space debris. You are 3,300 times more likely to be hit by falling space trash than you are to win the lottery. Just go outside and consider how often things randomly fall from the sky, and you'll know that you're a little better off to win the lottery. Evidently, this last Mega Millions purse worth $1.3 billion, there was a winner in Illinois who has yet to accept their prize. They haven't cashed in on their victory. In fact, they have less than a week left, I think, to be able to take the one lump sum payment cash prize. If they don't claim it in another week, they'll have to take the 30-year annuity option, and it will be paid out over 30 years. Some people think that the winner from Illinois that bought the ticket in Illinois, maybe they lost the ticket. They don't know that they've won. Some experts say that when the prizes become very, very large, that it takes longer for people to claim them because they are seeking, legal and financial advice and counsel as to what to do with their winnings, and so maybe somebody will claim that prize. I've come to terms, though, that I ought not count on ever winning the lottery, especially since I've never purchased a ticket, right? I would suggest that maybe you ought not count on winning the lottery either. There are some things that we simply can't count on having victory in. As followers of Jesus, though, we can absolutely count on the victory we have in Him. And that's really the story of Revelation chapter 14. There are 3 events in Revelation chapter 14 that point out to this victory that we can absolutely count on. If you have your Bibles, I'd love for you to open them up to Revelation chapter 14. That's at the very end of your New Testament. We're going to work our way through chapter 14. We'll deal with this scripture as we account for each one of these events. Revelation chapter 14. Event number 1 is a new song. We have this new song we need to consider. Let's look at the first 5 verses here in Revelation chapter 14. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. And they were singing a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Those have been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. What an awesome scene here on Mount Zion in the presence of the Lamb. 144,000 gathered there. We've met this group of folks before. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. We left last week at the end of chapter 13 with this warning about the mark of the beast. We talked about some of the things that maybe it is and maybe it isn't, and we came to the conclusion that I think it's the fruit of your life. It's who you're submitting to and living for. That's the mark on your life. And what stood out to me here in the very first verse of chapter 14 is the obvious difference between these two groups. It's so clear that one will pursue their own selfish desires and worship the beast, and one will have the name of the Lamb and their God written on their forehead. The difference is so clear. It's so obvious. It's like when you're watching a sporting event and teams have jerseys, or this football season they have football helmets on, and they're marked differently, aren't they? They're different colors, they have different logos, and it's one of the reasons that is true is so that everyone will know, including the contestants, including the athletes, which team is which. They'll be obvious. One team will be in red and one team will be in blue. The difference is so clear. I just randomly had somebody select some teams to represent the wicked and the righteous, and just to illustrate the clear difference between two teams. That's why they wear these uniforms. Randomly selected, computer generated. The obvious is different. The difference is obvious, is what I intended to say. And it doesn't even begin with this group. You know, it doesn't begin with 144,000, or it doesn't begin with those marked by the beast. You remember at the end of chapter 12 in Revelation, we left the dragon, the enemy, and where was he standing? On the sand of the sea, on the shifting sand. And here we encounter the Lamb, we encounter Jesus, and where is he standing? On Mount Zion, on the rock, on this mountain. Jesus told a story about a wise man and a foolish man in Matthew chapter 7. Maybe if you grew up in Sunday school, you remember the song about the wise man who built his house upon the rock, and the foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rains came down and the floods came up, and the rains came down and the floods came up, and the house on the rock stood sure, and the house on the sand went splat. It's the same story here. The difference is so obvious here as well, that you have the enemy standing on the shifting sand of the sea and in chaos and doing all they can to bring that chaos into the world, and you have the Lamb standing on the rock, on the mountain. And we have this opportunity to stand with the Lamb. It's not the first time that we've met this 144,000. You go back to Revelation chapter 7, we meet this group of folks sealed, marked by the Spirit, marked with the name of the Lamb and the Father on their forehead. It's not just 144,000, but it's a number that represents the fullness, the complete family of God. Everyone who said yes to the Lamb, everyone who's a part of his family is gathered in his presence on this mountain. Verse 2 said, "And I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps, and they were singing a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth." What a sound it must have been. And there's no mistaking this sound either. Some of you have asked, how are you and Sherry doing? We have three kids all in college now. Our youngest just went off to school. And so, again, don't follow me for financial planning. 3 kids in college at the same time. Anyway, we have them all off to school. So we're empty nesters, I guess. And people say, well, how's that going? You know what? It's pretty okay. You've got kids at home? Something I never considered. I might want to just boarding school. No, I don't mean that. It's different, right? It's different, and we wouldn't trade, that season of life either. But it's different, and it's been okay. I am a little worried about Sherry because on a couple of occasions, the last few weeks, we'll be in different rooms in the house, and she'll come down the hallway and she'll say, "What did you say, Lance? What did you say?" And I didn't say anything, and so I have to say, Sherry, no words came from my mouth. I haven't said anything. You must have heard, the TV or something. It wasn't me, though. And so a little worried about Sherry. But verse 2, there's no mistaking this new song, like a sound of rushing waters. I'm not sure what a choir of angels playing the harp sounds like, but you won't miss it. And here they're singing in verse 3 this new song. This new song. It's a phrase that you've probably read in the Old Testament over and over and over in the Old Testament. We hear about this new song. It's sort of crept into our vernacular even in the church. We talk about having this new song, singing a new song. And I thought, well, I want to get an example. I want to take a look at an example of this new song in the Old Testament. And I turned to the 96th Psalm. The first 6 verses of Psalm 96 say this: "Oh, sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Sing to the Lord, bless his name. Tell of his salvation from day to day. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous works among all the peoples. For great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. He is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of all the peoples are worthless idols. But the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and beauty are in his sanctuary." It's a new song that is no new song. It's a song that should have been sung since before creation, that there is one God who has created everything we see. There is one God who keeps it all going. There is one God, we are reminded in Revelation chapter 14, who has redeemed his people, who has bought us back through his son Jesus, who is about redeeming the entire universe, all of his creation. That's his goal. That's what he wants to do. And here that new song is being belted out by these angels and eventually the redeemed. Because verse 3 goes on to tell us that no one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. Let's take note, first of all, where we are. We're on Mount Zion, on this rock, but we're also in the throne room of God, aren't we? That's the description. You go back to Revelation chapter 4, you've got those 4 angels surrounding the throne. You've got those elders surrounding them. It's the same description here. We're not looking so much at a physical, at a geographical location. Where is Mount Zion? We are in the throne room of God. This is the rock. This is the promise. We are in the presence of the Lamb. And here in the presence of the Lamb, the redeemed are learning this new song. That word learn is an interesting word. It's monthano in the Greek, and it means to hear deeply. To hear deeply. It's more than just listening. It's really understanding. It's really hearing. It's taking it, the message to heart. It's what John describes this, I think, this idea of hearing deeply. And in John chapter 6, verses 45, the same Greek word is used. He said, "Hey, look, you can come to me when you learn from the Father, when you hear from him. When you take to heart this message, this song that has been sung since before creation." It's what John describes as believing in his gospel, to hear, to repent and change direction, to say yes to Jesus in baptism, to grow in him, to allow the Holy Spirit to work in us, to change us from the inside out, to be sanctified, made holy, set apart for him, and to go on mission for him. To hear deeply this new song. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as firstfruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. We get this description in verses 4 and 5 of the 144,000. They're described as virgins, and some groups take this very, very seriously, and they say, oh, okay, well, we need to this is a separate sort of super spiritual group who have never been married, who have never had sex, and who are virgins. And I don't think that's necessarily what's going on. I think in order to do that, you kind of have to throw out the rest of the New Testament that doesn't talk about marriage as a negative thing really at all. And I think the message here is these are believers who are made pure by Jesus. There's no sexual immorality among them. That's the first characteristic. The second characteristic is that they go where Jesus goes. That they are on mission with him. And wherever they go, Jesus is there. I'm encouraged when I hear from families with students in college from Wallula Christian Church. This doesn't always happen. And I've just heard several stories in the last couple of months about college students who are worshiping in a local church where they attend school, who are serving in college ministries on campus and at those churches. And it's encouraging to know that they are going with Jesus. We hear those stories from families in the military here all the time who maybe make Wallula their home while they're stationed here, and when they go somewhere else, they're going and serving in another church in another location and serving where they go. They're going where Jesus goes. And it's why missions is such an important part of what we do here at Wallula Christian Church. And we support, missionaries in Thailand and the prison system in Honduras. In fact, there's some information in your bulletin about a Honduras mission trip coming up in this next year and how to participate in that. And, we just want to go where Jesus goes. We want to serve him. We want to be on mission for him, like this description of the 144,000. They're described as the first fruits for God, and we could hear this in a couple of different ways. We could hear this as sort of the deposit, right? This is a deposit, and there'll be more to come. And so maybe this group represents just the first of the redeemed. I don't think that's really the story here with the purity angle and the service, and then that they're blameless in the last verse, in verse 5 here. These first fruits, rather, I think is an offering to God, set apart, separated out, sanctified. They're marked by the name of the Lamb and the Father on their forehead. They've submitted to service to him. And finally, they're blameless. This is a description in the Old Testament of folks like Noah and Abraham. And the point here isn't that Noah or Abraham or anyone else with this description lived a sinless life, but they lived a life devoted to service to their God, and here in relationship with the Lamb, in the presence of the Lamb. Event number 1 is this new song that each one of us can sing. Event number 2 is rest. Let's look at verses 6 through 13 here. Then I saw another angel flying directly overhead with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. And he said with a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water." Another angel, a second, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality." And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night. These worshipers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name." Here is a call for the endurance of the saints. those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, and they may rest from their labor, for their deeds follow them. Then I saw another angel flying directly over. All these angels in Revelation, and here this one is sort of hovering overhead. And the point is the same as that noise, that the harps playing and the song being sung in verse 2. You can't miss this. This message is for everyone. It's for every tribe and every nation, every people on earth. This angel has the authority to share with us this story, this eternal gospel. That word gospel means good news. It's a word that we're familiar with in the New Testament. We're used to places like Matthew chapter 9, verse 35, when it says, and Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. This is the story of the gospel that we're used to. Peace on earth and goodwill to men. Jesus going forth and setting people free. Loosing the chains and healing the sick. This is good news. And surely this is the good news of the 144,000 in the presence of the Lamb. And yet with this good news, this eternal gospel, there's another side to the coin. Message, a part of this good news that we're not used to hearing in that way. We get verse 7, and he said with a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth and the sea and the springs of water. We get this message, this call to fear God. That word doesn't really mean to be afraid, although we shouldn't let go of that part of the meaning altogether. If there's anything to be afraid of in the last few verses, surely it's that dragon standing on shifting sea, or one of those beasts with multiple heads, one cut off and regrown and healed. Those are what we ought to be afraid of, and yet here John says, fear the Lamb. Honor God. Respect him for who he is, because absolutely his judgment is a part of this eternal gospel. We're reminded in verse 8 that the enemy will fall. Another angel, a second followed, saying, fallen, fallen is Babylon the great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. We're pointing to, you can look at Isaiah chapter 21, verse 9, and there the prophet Isaiah is talking about the fall of historic Babylon, but Babylon grows into a reference to the enemies of God's people, to the enemy of God. And I'm reminded as I read about Babylon here in verse 8, who made all the nations drink of the wine of passion of her sexual immorality, I'm reminded of the story of Daniel. Do you remember Daniel chapter 1 when he and some others, the best of the best in Israel, are carried off into captivity into Babylon? And what's the first thing that they're instructed to do? Well, it's to eat the food that the king offers, to learn the lessons that are being taught, to immerse themselves into the culture of Babylon. They want to assimilate as quickly as possible these potential leaders into the kingdom. And yet in Daniel chapter 1, Daniel said, I've already decided I won't eat the king's food. I won't immerse myself into this culture. I will honor and fear the one true God. Because the consequences of doing otherwise are what we read in verses 8 through 11. And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger. And he'll be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb. And again, I think that just describes for us how obvious the difference between these two are. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest, day or night, these worshipers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. When we ignore the Lamb, when we ignore God, when we ignore his son Jesus, we're left with this consequence. The other side of that good news, this eternal separation from God, is a few verses are a description of that real wrath of God, of hell, for all of eternity. And so we get to verse 12. Here is a call for the endurance of the saints. How often have we read this? I wish I was a better student and I had gone back in Revelation to find out, to count how many times we've read the statement, just hold on. Here's a call to the endurance of the saints. But this is a multiple call to endure for the followers of Jesus. Remember, that's what that word saints means. It's just a follower of Jesus, somebody who has said yes to him. And hold on, keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. Keep it up. Hold on till the end. I suppose you can tell from looking at me that I'm not really much of a cross-country fan or never a cross-country runner, but I've been to a few of these cross-country events, and there's a couple things that stand out to me always. All right, I'm fascinated by two groups of people, really all of them, all the athletes who complete the race, but I'm fascinated by two groups, those who finish at the front, right, who are just so close, or who receive the medal and win the victory. And I'm fascinated by those who are at the tail end of the pack, who just keep going. And one of the things that stands out to me is that as these athletes finish, they'll kind of gather along the finish line. And these athletes, these runners who are trailing behind, who have no chance at winning, who it would be generous to say that they're finishing at the end of the pack because they're kind of alone by themselves, far off the winning pace. And then the encouragement from parents and athletes to just hold on, just endure a little longer. And here is that heart. Just to the saints, to the followers of Jesus, I know it's going to be hard. I know that it's going to be difficult. There might even be this horrendous price to pay, but hold on a little longer. Just endure a little more. And this victory is so close. This win, this rest is so near. But look at verse 13, and I heard a voice from heaven saying, write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them. This blessing, this hope, this rest will sometimes only follow death. You know, I'm fascinated by those at the trail end of that race, but I'm also fascinated by the folks who are fast enough to win. I've got this, well, really, she's a friend of my daughter, Lacey, and a friend of our family's, and she's a college cross-country runner, and she told me one time that when I finished the race, she's an excellent runner, and she said, when I finish the race, I throw up. And I throw up because I don't know that I've ran hard enough unless I'm physically sick at the end of the race. This is fascinating to me. Right? I just think, what is going on? That I understand, I want to leave it all on the course. I get that. I understand, I want to do my very, very best. I want to push myself to this physical limit. But the idea that I want to endure and pour myself out so much that I will become physically ill at the end of the race is just sort of fascinating to me. And that's kind of the promise that we get here in Revelation chapter 14, verse 13. Endure. Hold on. You'll find rest, even if holding on, keeping the commandments of God, staying true, faithful, holding tight to faith in Christ means death. You'll find this rest. That's such an interesting word. It's such an interesting description. We use it often. We associate it often with death, and sometimes I suppose heaven. And we think, well, it's a chance to sit still, to take like this eternity-long nap, to be inactive. I suppose there's good reason for it, even biblically. It seems that after these 6 days of creation, God said, I'm resting. And creation was done. It was after this job well done, after he said over and over and over, and it is good, and it is good, and it is good. God rested after this job well done. I suppose we think of this rest as sort of a retirement. You know, some of the busiest people I know are retired. We get this notion, I'm going to be able to retire and kind of hang out, and then they're going here and they're going there, and they're serving here and they're serving there. I think that's more of the image of rest we get here than just this inactivity. The struggle perhaps is gone, but the worship and the service, I think, continues. And certainly we ought to pay attention to God's example, because he rested after a job well done. And until we hear those words, well done, good and faithful servant, until we receive that blessing of rest that comes only through, death, then we have a job to do. We have a mission to be a part of. There is still work to be done. And so share this eternal gospel, the good news that Jesus has made a way to be in my presence forever and ever and ever. That though the wrath of God is real and serious, we don't have to face the consequences of that team. Here, the event number 3 is harvest here at the end of this chapter. Verse 14 through 16 say, Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud, one like a son of man with a golden crown on his head and sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, Put your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. Judgment is on its way. We get this description of one like the Son of Man on a white cloud with a golden crown on his head. We've had similar descriptions of individuals in Revelation already. In chapter 1, verses 12 through 16, Jesus is described in a similar fashion. In chapter 10, verse 1, we get this angel who has this similar kind of garb on, but it's pretty clear that it's an angel standing in the stead of Jesus and in his place. And here, I think this is probably Jesus coming in judgment. And either way, this judgment is full and complete. Some scholars say that verses 14 through 16 is Jesus gathering his believers together. That's often how we hear harvest in the Gospels. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. We want to share this story and bring together more followers of Jesus. But in other places, that same imagery is used for judgment. In Matthew chapter 13, verses 24 to 30, it's that separating of the wheat from the weeds and in judgment. And here, I think that's what's being described is Jesus coming in judgment. And certainly, verses 17 through 20 speak of this full and complete kind of judgment. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle, and another angel came out from the altar, the angel who had authority over the fire, and he called with a loud voice to the one who had a sharp sickle, Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as the horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. This judgment is complete and total. Blood flowing from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle. That's somewhere between 5 and 6 feet deep. For 1,600 stadia, that's about 200 miles or so. If you measure Israel today, its length is 260 miles long. The imagery here, what John is saying is that this judgment is complete and total and full. That it's real and that the harvest is coming. You know, you probably ought not count on winning the lottery. In fact, even folks, what history tells us is that even folks who have won the lottery maybe don't end up as winners. People like David Lee Edwards, who won $27 million and then was penniless and living in a storage shed with his wife a few years later. They squandered their fortune on the goodies that so many folks do after coming into all of that money, things like high-end cars and mansions and a plane. They blew through $3 million in the first 3 months, and by the end of the first year, $12 million was in the wind. By 2006, the couple had spiraled into drug addiction, and 12 years after the win that changed his life, Edwards died, and hospice broke at the age of 58. Or William Bud Post, who was broke when he died in 2006, despite winning $16.2 million in the Pennsylvania lottery. It didn't last long. Just 1 year after he hit it big, Post was $1 million in debt. His ex-girlfriend sued him for part of his winnings, and his brother reportedly hired a hitman to kill him. The real problem, though, was lavish spending. He bought houses, boats, cars, and a twin-engine plane that he wasn't even licensed to fly. Or Alex Toth, who died broke in 2008 at the age of 60. He checked into a mental institution after splitting with his wife and getting charged with tax fraud by the IRS. All of this happened after the Florida resident won $13 million in the lottery. He chose to receive his winnings in annual installments that were paid out just for us as we study Revelation in an amount of $666,666 each year. The beast, that dragon, he will lie and tell you what victory looks like. But we can count. We can count on true victory when we endure and hold on to the commandments of God and keep the faith in Jesus. Let's stand and worship him now.